Okay, I'm in Mildura, Victoria, and I started from South Australia in Peterborough. I'm Teresa Van Leeshout, and I'm going on a big tour to publicly promote my new book. It's called The Political Persecution of Women and Children World. It's written for a global audience. Now, I'm an Australian teacher, but it's written for Australians as well. Now, it's got 12 chapters, and the book is quite brilliant, I have to say. Sorry, it's been printed in Melbourne, and it's printed in Melbourne and published in Australia. I'm also going to be promoting so if you want to get this book, you can get it from me for $39. If you get this book in a university, it costs you about $150. So it's a university level book with world-class research about women's and children's rights, but it's also about good men as well. It's a lot of information about good men too, which I made a distinction between good men and bad men in this world. And there's a lot about political and government corruption as well in the book, in Australia and around the world, and how that affects women and children and good men. Now, this is the first speech that I'm giving out of a series of speeches over the next 6 months. Actually, I just wanted to play a little song for you before I started off, which I should have done before, but I just have to test my equipment. So a bit of ACDC there, Thunderstruck, and ACDC is an Australian band that was formed in 1973. That's the same year that my brother David was born, and he's born on the same day as me, 2 years apart exactly. 1973 was when ACDC was formed. It's an Australian band, without a doubt the most brilliant Australian band ever, and probably one of the greatest bands in the world ever. And I'm also a Christian, and I'm sure that God and Jesus loves ACDC as well. So, it's great to have good Australian music when you've got something to talk about that's really important. And, so I'm giving a series of speeches. Okay, we'll play a bit more of that music at the end. Hang on, not that one. Okay, we'll play a bit more of that music at the end. So I'm going to talk for about an hour. And this is the first speech I'm giving in a series of speeches across Australia. So this is the first one. This one's mostly going to be about the economy. And also in the next 6 months in my promotion, as I'm travelling around, I'm going to Canberra, Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide, Perth, up to Broome, across to Darwin, and to Alice Springs, and then back to Adelaide. And I'm also promoting my book, but also I'm promoting a public campaign, because this year is the federal election year. And in the federal election year is 2025. Normally I go in the federal election as a candidate, and I've got my party, voterrightsparty.com. But I'm also promoting this year in the campaign for the Australian people to vote for their Governor-General. Vote for your Governor-General from a list of candidates, okay, which should be in the Constitution. That's the way the Constitution should have been written from the start, from 1900, but there's an unelected foreign British monarchy that appoints your Governor-General. Now, the reason why I'm doing this promotion is because it should be the Australian people should be voting for their Governor-General from a list of candidates. And I should be on that list because under God Almighty, there's, a reason why people become political leaders, and our nation is not functioning the way that it should be functioning. It's got bad politicians. There's problems with the Constitution and how they're implementing the Constitution. They're not actually implementing the Constitution the way that it's written, because the way it's written from 1900 is the Governor-General that has got all the power of the Constitution. Between Section 61 and 70, head of government, the head of government in Australia is the Governor-General. In council works with a group called the Federal Executive Council. Now, that Federal Executive Council is a team of politicians that work with the Governor-General and they lead the country. Now, the current politicians in the past 100 years, they haven't ran it that way. They've got two parties which they, under the Electoral Act of 1980 and the Commonwealth Electoral Act, which is the federal Commonwealth law of elections, they rigged it from the beginning, from 1918 in the Constitution, in the Electoral Act, by saying, there should be only two major parties. Now, that anywhere in the world, why they're doing that is just a corrupt system, because there's lots of independents and smaller parties that should have power because they make much better politicians. Also, the position of Prime Minister is not in the Constitution, and I've got a textbook which I didn't bring with me today, which I'll bring another time. It's in my motorhome bus that I'm travelling around in. And that textbook, as a teacher, because I worked as a high school teacher for 20 years, as high school secondary education, as social studies teacher and phys ed teacher, and I kept this textbook for over 20 years, and it talked about, in the textbook, about the Constitution, time to change the Constitution, so that the people can have a Bill of Rights and more rights and vote for their own leaders. And in that textbook, from that 1986 Royal Commission report, they proved all the people involved in that Royal Commission report, they're published in that textbook, and I wish I'd brought it with me today, but I'll bring it for the next speech. They said that the position of Prime Minister is not written in the Australian Constitution, and it isn't. So everybody that knows anything about the Constitution, the Australian Constitution, if you read it, you won't find the words Prime Minister in it anywhere. It's never been in there, it's never been put in there. The position of Prime Minister, the office of Prime Minister, that is actually not in the Australian Constitution. It's the Governor-General in Council works with what's called a Federal Executive Council under Section 61 to 70. So from the start, they haven't been doing it properly at all. Even from the first Prime Minister, they said Edmund Barton, from the first decade of Federation, from 1900, they put this position, they started calling it, but it's not actually written in there. So they just did it wrong from the beginning, okay? Plus the people involved in implementing were only men, no women, and Aboriginal people. Aboriginal people were not involved in implementing that constitution, so we really need a new constitution with a Bill of Rights and much better politicians as well. So they didn't do it properly from the start, and it's all corrupt from the start, and it should be changed. And so I'm campaigning for this public campaign for the next 6 months during this federal election year for the Australian people to vote for your own Governor-General on a list of candidates. And I want to be on that list because under God Almighty, I believe that's my job for this country. So that can only happen by public pressure and media pressure and all this sort of thing, which to get much better leaders for our nation and have some of those terrible parties banned because the corruption is just really, really bad and we all know it. Do you know, every time people go out and protest in public for the last 100 years, we all know that 95% of the protests for the last 100 years have always been about people complaining about the political and government people. Isn't that true? So when people go and protest in public, they're always complaining about the government people, what the government people are doing, what they're saying, what sort of laws they create, the way they use public money, the way they use a range of government workers. It's always complaints about them all the time, isn't that true? So that now is the way they use the law as well. You know, people say this is lawful or that's lawful, not lawful. But the way they use the law is really very corrupt in many, many ways. The way they use public money and government services and government workers and all this sort of thing. And that really has to stop and it has to change, and it should have stopped a long time ago, really. So we know that there's lots of complaints about the public, and even before Christmas, before I go into my speech about the economy, before Christmas, just this last Christmas, they tried to bring all these laws in. They did a misinformation, disinformation bill. It's just a sense of the population, and that's their priority before Christmas. How bad is that? Do you know what I mean? Their priority before Christmas is to bring in these horrible laws, and then they brought in another horrible law on the 7th of February, and about crimes, about a bill, hate speech bill, hate speech or hate crimes bill, where certain groups, you can't criticise certain groups or promote any sort of violence against certain groups, but I'm going to talk about that another time. So their priority is always to censor the population and destroy the the population's rights and all this sort of thing. And also they're trying to bring a cashless society, which is really dangerous, okay? That's a dangerous situation for any nation to be in. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later as well. So I'm going to go for about an hour each speech that I give. The next ones will be in Canberra. But this one's mostly about economics, okay? My economic vision for Australia. What I would do if I was the Governor-General of Australia, for example, and I've got on my political website, voterrightsparty.com, a lot of stuff about the economy and what it should be like. And the major priority is to empower the Australian people economically. And there's a few things on my political website which I actually have to update. So, you know, there'll be a few changes there. But in terms of economics, I want to talk about 5 main areas: the cost of living, a better bank and tax system, how to build 1 million homes in Australia, and also Jobs Grants Commission and ASIC and an economics board. And what I would do is I would use the Constitution, the powers of the Constitution that a Governor-General would have, for example, or you know, anyone else could be in that position, but they just use them like a rubber stamp, don't they? They actually turn the Governor-General into a criminal because these politicians just do all these criminal things to the population, and then they just rubber stamp all this corruption, and that's really bad. So the question is how to reduce the cost of living for Australians. Let's start with that one, because that's massive, isn't it? And we've seen, just look at it over the last 20 years, we've seen a big increase in the cost of living. By the way, when I taught, I've been a qualified and experienced teacher for nearly 30 years now, okay, and for 20 years I taught social studies and phys ed, and I taught a lot of economics as well. So over the last 30 years I've studied a lot of economics, I've taught a lot of economics, I do a lot of research on economics, and I really don't talk about this publicly enough, so I need to talk about this today. So let's look at the cost of living. How does Australia reduce the cost of living for Australians? How do we reduce the cost of living in terms of economics, the things you can do? What we need to do is we need to put an economic cap on basic services. It's called a price ceiling or an economic cap, where you put a price ceiling on essential services like telecommunications, healthcare, electricity, gas, water, homeowner rates, fees, all sorts of banking fees and charges, even bank interest. You can cap that. I'll talk about that more in a minute. There needs to be a law, a cost of living law, a Commonwealth cost of living law, where you put a cap on essential services. I'm not talking about stuff you buy from the shop, general stuff, furniture, or you know, just general things. I'm talking about essential services, things that every Australian needs, all Australians need, that they need to have that to be able to live and survive well. So like electricity, water, gas, homeowner rates, any sort of postal services need to be capped. They're going up too, but the country, it's a little bit different, that one, because the country services, they need to provide postal services. They're also providing more banking services these days. And they need some sort of subsidy because the cost of postal services has gone up because people aren't using as many postal services. So it's a bit of a different category. But then general cost of living. So water, the supply charge of water needs to be capped at a certain rate, and then the usage needs to be capped. The same with gas, electricity, and petroleum should be capped as well. Put an economic cap, put an economic cap of $1.50 for unleaded and leaded petrol and diesel, and those costs need to be capped. With electricity, for example, I'll prove to you over the past 20 years. The past 20 years, the cost of electricity has increased by fourfold. There's a 4 times increase in the cost of electricity for the public, and this is the reason why. The reason why is because the politicians allow these services, which have in the past, 70 years ago after the Second World War, these services were essential services, they're all government owned, right? And then they privatised everything and they allowed everything to be provided at a cost now 4 times higher than 20 years ago. So for example, the supply charge of, say, electricity. Let's just stick to electricity. I've got this old electricity bill from July of 2024 to prove to you that, say the supply charge got increased on this bill from $1.34 a day to $1.71 a day. Now, 20 years ago, that supply charge was probably about 30 cents a day, wasn't it? So that's a fourfold, or even higher, fivefold. Say if it was 50 cents, 40 cents a day. Say electricity supply charge was 40 cents a day 20 years ago, and now it's $1.71 a day. That's a fourfold increase in the cost of the supply of electricity. That has to be capped. So you have to bring it back to 20 years ago and put an economic cap on electricity. All this electricity supplied across Australia, and say, if you have an electricity company, you're not allowed to charge the Australian people more than 50 cents a day for supply of electricity. That will reduce that electricity supply charge by a quarter. It'll be reduced to a quarter of what it is now. So it'll be reduced by 75%. Those are the sorts of things that need to be done, because these essential services, they shouldn't be allowed to profit. Can't allow big profiting like this, like the banks. I'll talk about the banks more in a minute, but multi-billion-dollar annual profiting by banks is just totally criminal, and that should never, never, ever have been allowed to happen in Australia or anywhere around the world. So just going back to the example of electricity, ancillary charges, this is July 2024, they increased from 0.46 cents a kilowatt to 0.50 cents a kilowatt. Now, 20 years ago, that auxiliary charge would have been 0.18 cents a unit, okay? So again, we've got like about nearly a threefold increase in the cost. Peak burst, 11 kilowatt per day. That's 0.60 cents a kilowatt, and then now, from the 1st of July of last year, it was 0.685 cents a kilowatt. So 20 years ago, they would have been charging 0.18 cents a kilowatt for electricity. That's a fourfold increase in the cost of electricity, nearly. And peak remaining use per day, 0.64 cents a kilowatt up to 0.73 cents a kilowatt. Again, you go back 20 years, it would have been 0.16 a kilowatt or 0.17 a kilowatt. It would have been 0.18 cents a kilowatt. So it's increased by 4 times the amount in the last 20 years. If we have a cost of living law, we can cap that rate that any electricity supplier will say they can charge the Australian people. So their profits will be reduced by 75%, but the cost of electricity to you will be capped at 0.18 cents a unit. And that's what it should be, because we can't say you're allowed to profit, make big profits of the Australian people, and that's just not acceptable. Now, the same has to be done with the water, gas, electricity, petroleum should be capped, and homeowner rates should be capped, so $1,500 a year. You can't charge homeowner rates more than $1,500 a year in Australia with an economic law. And then you go, excuse me, you go all the way through the list, and every fee and every cost, excuse me, sorry, every cost of living charge has to be capped, so you go through everything. Other charges that should be capped, have to be capped, are state government fees. Also, the fine system, I just abolished the fine system. The fine system is just a horrible, disgusting, violent, criminal, abusive system where they say there's a list of criminal activity. They say it's a list of criminal activity, all minor things usually. And then they say, oh, if you do these criminal things, we're going to make money out of you. That's what fine system, that's what that fine system is, making money out of what they deem to be criminal activity. So therefore, they're acting like a mafia. That's how the mafia operates, isn't it? When they say, here's a list of criminal activity and we're going to make money out of you, we're going to extort and steal money out of you. That's like a mafia system. So that fine system needs to be abolished. They put people in prison without trials with the fine system because they've got no money. People have become homeless under the fine system. People have committed suicide under the fine system. And I think people have even been murdered under the fine system as well. That's how bad it is. So with the cost of living, you know, if we cap these supply charge rates and the base charges rates, say, for example, this I'm using for electricity, all these electricity companies, you know what they'll do? They'll go, these electricity companies, they'll go, oh, we're not going to supply electricity under that rate. We're not going to supply for that rate. We're not going to do it at a loss. So any electricity across Australia then would be seized. It would be seized by the federal government, and we'll put new people in charge of those electricity companies that supply them, and they'll be employed as workers. That's it. So no profiting, no big profiting the way they're doing. They won't supply it at those rates, but we'll force them to supply it by saying, okay, you no longer own that company. That company now is going to be owned by the Australian people, and it'll have a legal name, the Australian people as a legal name. So any minerals and mines and, you know, copper, gold, silver, petroleum, anything, mine, oil, gas as well, anything that, any natural resource in Australia that has mineral wealth, that can be owned by the Australian people. You put it in a legal name of the Australian people, and then that's owned by the Australian people. So none of these foreign companies owning any Australian resources anymore. And you employ Australians to operate those companies, and they'll be owned by the government. They'll be owned by the Australian people with a legal name, the Australian people, and that's what, whether it's diamond, gold, copper, silver, oil, petroleum, ports, airports, anything like that, any sort of public resource can be owned by Australians. Now, this is how you reduce the cost of living too, because you can cut the rates and you can cap the rates and employ Australians to run those businesses and organisations and corporations, and then that's profiting, and then they go, you know, those profits go back to the Australian people. So if they start saying, oh, well, we're not going to supply electricity at that price, Theresa Van Leisha, we're not going to do that. We're not going to supply it at 0.18 cents a unit. We're not going to cap our daily supply charges 40 cents a day. We're not going to do that. So, okay, well, you could be arrested for obstruction of justice. How about that? Start with. And then I'll put people in charge of those organisations that will do it. And they'll be employed to do it. And that's the way it should be. And that can be applied across a whole range of services which are essential services, even transport services, you know. We should have rail networks everywhere, bus networks everywhere. Some states are better than others. And you need a more effective and efficient tax system as well. So the politicians need to be forced to create a better and more efficient tax system and not use the fine system abusively and violently to make money. That's not an effective tax system, is it? That's all very abusive. So all these costs can be capped, and you just have a single law, cost of living law, and you cap all these essential costs, and that's it, and you force these companies to do it, and if they don't do it, they'll get arrested for obstruction of justice under Commonwealth law, and you put people in charge of those organisations who'll do it at those lower costs, and that will massively reduce the cost of living for Australians. That is the economic way to reduce the cost of living for Australians. Not providing subsidies to these big corporations, not providing, paying them off to say, look, we'll give you $5 billion if you drop the rate from 0.73 cents a unit back to 0.18 cents a unit or 0.2 cents a unit. We'll pay you $5 billion. No, you don't do that. You don't need to pay them to drop the cost, the base rate cost and the supply rate cost. You don't need to pay them to do it. You need to use the law to force them to do it. You create an economic cost of living law to do it, and you say you're going to do it for the people or you're going to get fired or removed, and we're going to put someone else in there who's going to do it. It's the same with also, you know, state government charges. Every time you buy a vehicle or a house, they slug you 3.7% stamp duty. That's absolutely disgusting. It should be capped. Again, in the economic law, cost of living law, they can only charge you 1%. If you buy a house, you pay 1% stamp duty, not 3.7%. If you buy a car, you pay 1% stamp duty. That's it. Don't pay 3.7%. It has to be capped. All state government fees and charges, you know how they're going up and up and up and every year. Registration, car registration, boat registration, caravan registration, motorhome registration, truck registration, any sort of vehicle registration, disgusting. Absolutely disgusting. So it needs to be capped. We need to say, you can't charge more than $150 a year or whatever, or bring it right down, it'd be an economic amount, $150 a year to register a car. Even a trailer costs you $100 a year. It should be $25 a year, or a caravan, or a motorhome, or a truck. Now, there has to be an economic cap on a registration fee for a vehicle. Licensing fees. If you get a driver's licence, any sort of driver's licence, or any sort of licence, even a passport. I had to get a passport a couple of months ago. It cost me $400 to get a passport. The last time I got a passport, it was $100. That is absolutely disgusting. Any sort of state or Commonwealth government fee or charge has to be capped at a very low rate. Why? Is there any sort of profiting or money making going on for fees and charges for essential services? They force you to have that registration, a car registration, or they force you to have a home owner rates charge. They're forcing you. You've got no rights to say what it is. That's bad. That's a bad system for any nation, and it should never ever be like that. It should be minimal charges for stamp duty, for any sort of fee or government charge of anything. And you bring it right down. So car registration costs you $800 a year to register a car now, your vehicle. Everybody's got a vehicle. It should be capped at $150 a year. That's it. Or even $100 a year. And then they go all these insurance claims and insurance costs and all that. Well, why are they letting all these insurance companies do what they want? They're letting the insurance companies do what they want, the telecommunications, healthcare, even doctors. Allowing doctors, and the banks are the worst, aren't they? You know, I'll talk about them more in a minute. So, you know, the way the Medicare system is run, Medicare is essential, but we should employ doctors the same way we employ teachers. So I worked as a teacher for 20 years. I was at $100,000 a year by the end of my career in the high schools. And these doctors, some of them are making millions of dollars every year. They are basically charging you to have a service every 15 minutes, and you're out in 15 minutes, and then they're charging you every time. Why do we allow doctors to charge people a fee? Doctors should be employed the same way that teachers are employed. So you employ teachers and university teachers and high school teachers and primary school teachers, and you employ doctors and nurses the same way. That's how they employ nurses. They pay nurses a salary with entitlements, and they don't charge the public. Nurses don't. Why do we allow doctors to charge these horrible fees everywhere, and that blows out the cost of health billions and billions and hundreds of billions of dollars, because they are profiting from this. If you want to be a doctor and help people, you do it because you love people and you care about people, and like a teacher works because they care about people and they want to help people and inspire people and encourage people, and they don't charge millions of dollars. They get paid $80,000 a year or $100,000 a year or $120,000. We should be paying doctors maybe $120,000 a year or $150,000 a year. You want to work as a doctor in Australia? Well, we'll take doctors from all over the world and we'll employ you at $150,000 a year, and you're going to provide health services to the Australian people, because you're going to, under God Almighty and Jesus Christ in the New Testament, think about why you became a doctor. Was it to help people and heal people like Jesus did, or was it to make big money? And that's wrong to do that. And I'm sure there'll be doctors, good doctors all over the world who want to work in Australia under that system because they actually care about people. Okay, what we need is a much better banking system. We need, how are we going for time? Just checking the time. Pardon? Okay, I've got about 20 minutes to go. Okay, a better banking system and a better tax system. You know, why is it that politicians and their rubber stamp governor generals have allowed for over 100 years banks to profit multi-billion-dollar profits? In the last 50 years especially, and we all know it, every year the banks are profiting billions of dollars. How disgusting and criminal is that? How disgusting and criminal is it allowed to banks in Australia and all over the world billion-dollar profits, multi-billion-dollar profits? Now, interestingly, before I became a teacher, I worked in a bank. I worked in a bank for nearly 10 years. And I know a lot about banking, okay? I know a lot about banking. And the love of money is the source of all kinds of evil. That's the teaching in the New Testament, isn't it? Jesus taught about how to manage money and not go after money and love money. And Paul the Apostle spoke about that too. If you love money, you're going to become corrupt, okay? And you're managing, as a bank teller, I used to manage millions of dollars every day. But if you're a director of a bank and you're managing billions of dollars every day and every month and every year, you're going to become corrupt. We know that these banking directors, like the Commonwealth Bank, it's 12 banking directors, they're on about $5 million a year. It's just criminal and disgusting. So all that has to be capped. You have to have an economic cap on what banks can charge, interest rates, fees, any sort of banking services. And we must have banking, face-to-face banking services, branch banking, ATMs. They are closing. In the last 7 years, they've closed about 40% of the ATMs and branches in this country. They're trying to create a cashless society, and that's very dangerous, because after that, you've got the mark of the beast, and the right hand of authority can't go to the shop and buy food unless you've got that mark. It's really criminal and dangerous and evil. So the banking system, there must be branch banking in all towns, face-to-face banking, non-profit banking services. Interest rates must be capped. You can't charge more than 1% variation of the Reserve Bank rate. And how do we do that? Well, the Governor-General and the Federal Executive Council under Section 61 to 70 of the Constitution has to control the Reserve Bank. For years, decades and decades and decades, they have allowed an independent group of people to control the Reserve Bank like a mafia. And they are setting their own Reserve Bank rate. We're going to say and do what we want, set that rate and charge whatever interest rate, Reserve Bank lending rate that they want to charge. And they are doing that like they are owning their bank. So the politicians are just bowing to them, and the Governor-General is just bowing to them, saying, oh yes, you can do what you want, but that's bullshit. You have to take control of the Reserve Bank. Okay, the Governor-General does, and the Federal Executive Council, and that way, that's how you have monetary policy. If you don't control the Reserve Bank, if you don't control the Reserve Bank of any country, you don't have monetary policy. You don't have monetary policy. Monetary policy is the setting and regulating of interest rates. And the Governor-General and the Federal Executive Council must control the Reserve Bank and kick those people out and say, no, sorry, what you've been doing is really criminal. You cannot, we are going to control the Reserve Bank, and that Reserve Bank lending rate must be at 1%. 1% Reserve Bank lending rate. Do you know, what I'm thinking about, the concept of inflation is bullshit. Do you know that the concept of the cost of living is very, very real? The cost of living is very real. But inflation is bullshit. It's rubbish. So they can say, oh, inflation this and inflation that, inflation, so we have to put the interest rates up. But they're just profiting. That's bullshit. They're lying. Inflation is rubbish. That's just a man-made economic concept which they made, and they're doing that so they can charge whatever interest rates they want. Therefore, you know, you're suffering, and people have to sell their homes and can't pay their mortgages because of this disgusting profiting, this criminal activity in the banking sector. So with the bank's Reserve Bank rate, you cap it at 1%, and it's controlled by the Governor-General and the Federal Executive Council, and then all the banks across Australia, they cannot charge a homeowner interest rate, home loan interest rate, more than 1% of the variation, the Reserve Bank rate variation. So if it's a 1% Reserve Bank, and then all the banks across Australia, you can do a lending home loan, 1% variation in the Reserve Bank rate, not more than 1%. So therefore, every home loan in Australia should be only 2%. That's it. So the most they could charge for a home loan would be 2%. And then you have a cap on personal loans and credit cards and everything. You have a cap of the rate of what they can charge on a personal loan, a home loan, credit cards, any sort banking. All right, now, as I said, I worked in a bank for about 8 years before I became a teacher. I know a lot about banking as well. So you've got to do that. You've got to rule them with an iron rod. They have to be ruled with an iron rod because we know the love of money is the source of all kinds of evil. They're probably trying to assassinate me just over that, but I'll tell you what, I would have so much protection around me like Mr. Trump, you know, because they already tried to assassinate me twice, and look out here, I'm still alive, I'm still here, by God Almighty protecting me, and all the prayers of the saints out there, and all the Christian people, and all the groups out there who've been praying for me, and they're advocating for my rights as well. So you have to rule those banks with an iron rod, and set those rates, cap those rates, and then they can't charge whatever they want. They can't profit. No more profiting of the banks. An effective tax system. You have to have an effective tax system. The tax system in Australia is absolute shit. It's crap. It's all convoluted. You know, the tax return system should be abolished. And I would implement a tax system. I would implement a tax system through the banking system. So, again, you can have a transactional tax on bank accounts at a very low rate, and they've done this in other countries, in Europe and in South America, and other nations have done it. And you have a transactional tax on the banking system. And the banking system accounts works like you have a personal account or a joint account, and sole traders, partnerships, and corporations, and you have trust accounts. That's how the banking system works. Okay, as I said, I know a lot about the banking system. So that you have it capped at like 2% on individual accounts. So all workers out there will be paying 2% tax, 1% on deposits and 1% on withdrawals. Very, very low. And then you abolish the tax return, you abolish income tax. Income tax is just disgusting. They want to take 30% from you, 35%, 40%, 45%. That's just criminal to do that to working people. That's like slavery. So abolish that, have a transactional tax for individuals, and or pensioners. If you're over pension age, you get exempt. I think the unemployment should pay tax. You know, you've got millions of people in Australia working hard every day, business people working people working, supporting their families and supporting themselves, keeping the economy going. They're working their asses off every day, the business people and the working people. And then you've got people on the dole for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, and that's all bullshit as well. We have to create jobs for people and force people to work, because we can't, it's not fair to do that. It's not right to do that. If you don't work, you don't eat. But we can't just cut people off. We have to create proper jobs, and I'll talk about that as well in a minute. So an effective tax system has to be low transactional tax. If you're a sole trader, you'd be paying 4% tax under the tax model that I created, 2% on deposits and 2% on withdrawals. If you're a partnership account, you pay 6% tax, 3% on deposits and 3% on withdrawals. If you're a corporation account, you pay 8% tax, 4% on deposits and 4% on withdrawals. So it's on the transactional tax. So all the corporations, every time they put money in their account, they'll be paying 4% tax to the Commonwealth. Every time they write a cheque or a draw, they pay 4% tax. That way the corporations are paying more tax than a worker. A worker would pay 2% tax and a corporation would pay 8% tax. That's fair, right? That's a much fairer and better system of taxation than the bullshit way that they do it. You have to get rid of the tax return system. Just get rid of it. We don't need a tax return system. We don't need it. You just do it through the banking system, and you force the banks to do it. You say, you're going to do this, you're going to implement this tax system, all these banking directors, and if you don't implement this tax system, all your banking directors, you're going to get arrested for obstruction of justice. And make sure that they implement a proper tax system through the transactional tax system at very low rates. And you can have exemptions. Pensioners can be exempt. Disability people can be exempt. Having said that, though, there's 4 million Australians under the psychiatric system. That has to be abolished. You've got people out there claiming to be disabled, and they're not even disabled. They're not disabled. If you're physically disabled, you're disabled. If you've got half a leg missing, you're disabled. If you're blind, you're disabled. If you're physically disabled, you are. But you have people out there saying they're disabled. They're not disabled. They're basically just getting money for nothing. And you've got all these hard-working workers out there and business people working their asses off, paying for all this, And that's a $50 billion a year system, that bloody welfare system. I'm telling you, we got to create jobs and force people to work. Not just cut them off, but get proper jobs. Here's 3 jobs, and take this job, and you've got to work. Because you've got to contribute something to supporting yourself and your family and contributing to society. Can't have the hard-working people doing all the hard work and for 5 or 6 million people doing nothing on some unemployment or fake disability or whatever. And the psychiatric system, if that's abolished, because they're killing people under that system, I'm going to talk about that another time, but they're killing people with those drugs since the 1920s. And for 200 years, that's a $25 billion a year system that should be abolished. That's saving $25 billion for all the working people right there and all the business people. And that money can be used to create jobs for those people, because there's no reason to drug people by force. That's just killing them. And that's a bad, bad, bad practice. I'm telling you, that's bad. Okay. All right, I said I'm going to go for an hour, so I've got to stop soon. Anyway, build 1 million homes for Australians. Okay, Teresa, how are you going to build 1 million homes for Australians? Yep, oh, that's a great question. You should ask me every question, how are you going to build 1 million homes? This is how we build 1 million homes in Australia. First of all, you build them across all country towns in Australia, and you do it by seizing land, by buying bulk land, and seizing the land of the states, and buying the land as well. You can buy private land from people. And you build like a section, say 50 houses in every country town in Australia, and then an area where you build those 50 houses, okay? And so it's all controlled and localised to a specific area. And you would use the banking system to build those houses. So the Governor-General and the Federal Executive Council would need to take control of the Reserve Bank and the Commonwealth Bank. The Commonwealth Bank was an Australian-owned bank in the 1940s. In 1945 it was created under the 1945 Banking Act. It was owned by the Commonwealth. So that needs to be taken control of, the Commonwealth, and you use the Commonwealth Bank it'll cost about $250 billion of lending to build 1 million homes, and you give it capped at $250,000. So you build a house, the land and the house at $250 in a country town, which is very doable, plus you're supporting all the business people in the country town, and all the community services and all the other services and people in the country town. And then you say, okay, you can only build houses at $250,000, so the houses are built, and it's all funded through the Commonwealth Bank. So people apply straight away to buy that house, and it must be born in this country to buy the house first. People who don't have a home, people who are born here, or citizens of this country, Australia, and they have to, and homeless people, starting with the people who are homeless. For 50 years, you've had thousands and thousands of people homeless in Melbourne and Sydney and Brisbane and Adelaide and Perth, and it's absolutely criminal and disgusting to allow people to suffer that way, people born in this country. So you must be born in the country or a citizen of the country. If you don't have a house or never had a house, if you're renting a house and you've never had a house, you go on the list to be able to buy these houses. Or if you're homeless, you get to buy these houses. You can pay off a house over 25 years or 30 years at a 2% Commonwealth Bank home loan, okay? So that's lending is provided by, not the public, but by the bank. The bank will lend $250,000 to a man or a woman or a couple, a married couple or a partner that might have a few children, and then you have 3-bedroom houses and you build basic houses. Nice kitchen, 3 bedrooms, and laundry and a bit of a backyard, maybe minimum 500 square metres, so there must be 500 square metres minimum, 3 bedrooms, and they're $250,000. So building contractors, they get that contract to build the homes in this town, and that town, and this town, and it's all capped. No, just giving millions and millions of dollars to these businesses and corporations and organisations, and all they do is profit. It's disgusting, and nothing actually gets done. Like every time they try and fix a train line, or, improve they destroy $1 billion. How does it take $1 billion to build a train line or fix a train line? That's absolute bullshit. So you cap it at $250,000, okay? And that's the lending that's all done through the Commonwealth Bank. That's what a bank is for. So the public is not paying for it. The banking system is paying for it. Those people about. You have somewhere good to live and safe to live, you get a job, you have a business, and you support your family and the community, and that's the way life should be. Okay? 1 million homes, because what they've done with the housing situation in Australia is absolutely criminal and disgusting, isn't it? We know that. You go to the city, you can't buy a house for under $1 million. And then in the country as well, it's getting up to $250,000 for many, many homes. And this is just wrong. People, young people growing up, they become adults, and they think, I can't afford to buy a house. I can't afford to have a house, and they spend their whole life renting. Also, with a home loan ownership program like the one I just described, you can take 25 years or 30 years to pay it off. They'll actually be paying less in a mortgage than in rent. So they'll all have a house to live in, they'll own their own home. You know, if you own your own home, you're going to look after the home. People who own their home themselves and pay off the home, they're looking after the house much better than if they rent. They go and rent someone's house, they don't care. They'll trash the house or stuff the house up, but they own their own home. They pay it off over 25 years at a 2% Commonwealth Bank home ownership loan, and that's manageable. That's manageable. That's probably $250 a week, or $300 a week, if that. It's probably $250 a week. So you can build 1 million homes like that over 3 years, 1 million homes over 3 years, and you can hold me to that because I'll do it in 3 years, and I'll say to the whole country, let's just do it. Let's build 1 million homes over the next 3 years, and let's get it done. And then they go, oh, but what about this, and what about that, and what about we can't do this and this. No, every time there's an obstacle, well, we work through the obstacle and we find the solution and the answer, and we make it happen. And not going through the state governments with their disgusting stamp duty fees and all that, and all their other fucking fees and disgusting charges and fees when you build a house or you buy a car, or all these horrible, disgusting fees that they're charging. When you go through that process and you spend $20,000 or more in stamp duty and taxes and fees and all these bullshit government fees, we'll say, no, we're not going to do that. We'll make a registry of all these homes in a Commonwealth registry of title ownership, and they'll own these homes through the Commonwealth. We're not going to pay your stamp duty, we're not going to pay your, state government fees and all this bullshit. It's going to be capped so big time that, we're not going to go through your system. So you can make that happen. You can save billions of dollars that way, building 1 million homes. You can save literally billions of dollars by saying, we're not going to pay those fees and that stamp duty, because it's just you making billions off the public again. They don't need that money. What do? What do state politicians do? Hardly anything. They might provide some transport services and the teachers and hospitals and all that, a little bit of work. But they don't. Most of the politicians, they don't do anything. They just make themselves rich. They make themselves rich and they fuck everybody over, and it's just bad news, isn't it? Sorry about the language. I'm a Christian, but I'm a very outspoken Christian, and obviously, I'm not perfect or anything like that. Job Grants Commission. A Job Grants Commission of $50 billion a year. Do you know that they have I'm just checking the reporting, I hope it's still going. They just check, they have about a $350 billion budget every year. So it's probably more than that. It's probably about $400 billion a year. What do they spend it on? What do they spend $350 billion a year? These are the federal politicians and their Governor General rubber stamp. What do they spend $400 billion a year on? Nothing, really. What have they got to show for it? And they try to change the Constitution with that voice thing, which I'm not against giving people a bigger voice, but they spend over $400 million on that. Trying to change the Constitution. It's just a piece of paper. Just write a new Constitution. You don't just spend over $400 million for changing a piece of paper. How stupid is that? That is just absolutely stupid, gratuitous waste of money. So Jobs Grants Commission, $50 billion a year out of about a $350 billion Commonwealth budget annual. And that's $50 billion a year. And grants capped at $250,000 to community groups and small business and organisations. Community groups and organisations and small business people. Small business, do you know the small business sector is the biggest employer in the whole country? And that's true in the United States as well, and in Europe, and probably most Asian nations as well. The small business people, the small business sector, employ more people than anybody, any industry. The corporations make bigger profits, they don't employ as many people, okay? But the small business sector always need to be looked after because they employ more people than anyone. Now, if you have a shop in a supermarket or shopping centre, and there's big shopping complexes, they make $10,000 a year rent of those shops. That's disgusting. That all has to be capped. All the small business charges, rental charges, and in the supermarket, and the shopping centres, and the malls, and the streets, and the towns, and the cities, all these small business rentals and some of these costs, they should be capped or scrapped, okay, so that they can profit more, employ more people. You've got to look after the small business people. So Jobs Grants Commission, capped at 250,000 people, and they must employ 3 people. That's for a year, so you can pay 3 people $70,000 a year at a cost of $210,000, and there's $40,000 left over for any equipment or training and expenses to help train those staff. And you can employ 4 people with that. You can employ 4 people at a $250,000 jobs grant, and you can employ 4 people at $60,000 a year, which is $240,000 a year, $10,000 left over for a bit of training. So $60,000 a year is a fairly good salary, especially if you're paying 2% interest on a better tax system. That is 200,000 grants a year, 200,000 grants to community groups and small businesses, capped at $250,000. So you don't give millions of dollars to this group and that group and this business and that. You don't give millions of dollars to people like that, businesses and community groups. You don't need to do that. You can cap it and spread it across the country. $250,000 capped. That's 200,000 grants at $50 billion a year. That's 600,000 jobs a year. That program that I created will create 600,000 jobs a year. 600,000 jobs a year. So then all the unemployed people, all the people drugged under psychiatry, which will be abolished. And anyone that wants to work part-time or have a new job, or people that are looking for jobs, you can give them, okay, offer them, here's 3 jobs, you have to pick one. You don't get to stay in the dole for 10 years or 15 years or 20 years. Here's 3 jobs, and you pick a job and you do that job, and you get paid $50,000 a year or $60,000 a year or $70,000 a year, and that's a good income to be able to pay off a house and, have a little family and buy things, and you can have garage sales and all this sort of thing to make extra money and all this sort of thing. There's lots of things you can do in society to get things, what you need for the house and for living and travelling and all that. That's, you try to do things cost effectively, and you can manage that. People can live on $70,000 a year or $60,000 a year. If you go on the dole, you're at $15,000 a year. So if you've got a job and you're getting paid $50,000 or $60,000 a year or $70,000 a year, that's a very big improvement in your life. Plus you're supporting yourself and your family and your friends and your community, and you're contributing to community, you're contributing to society. You've got something, you've got purpose and meaning, and you've got something to contribute to society, which is much more important than sitting around on the dole doing nothing. And it's totally unfair to all the working people, hard-working people, and all the business people across this country. It doesn't matter what country you're living in. So that creates 600,000 jobs a year, and under that program you wouldn't be able to get it every year. So you might get it 1 year, and then you could maybe reapply in 2 or 3 years' time, depending on the rules associated like that. So that if you missed out on those $200,000 grants in that first year, the next year you'll get the grant. You'll be eligible for the grant because the first $200,000, they wouldn't be able to get that grant the second year. It would be a new set of small businesses and community groups who would get that grant the following year, and then the following year it may be that you could apply again in a 2-year period of time, depending on how the program goes, because you have to monitor that to see how that goes, and you assess it and monitor it. see how that sort of thing goes. But then get those grants out as fast as you can so they can employ those people. That's employing 600,000 people a year. And then they would start employing those people, and that would go very quickly. And then the last thing I put here is, just for today, there's other economic ideas I've got, but this one's important, ASIC. ASIC is just a horrible, criminal, stealing, disgusting federal government organisation that has to be abolished. They stole $300,000 from me and other investors and business people, and they steal billions from the public over the last 25 years. They've destroyed a long list of Australian businesses and companies, and they're stealing the bank accounts and the assets, and they're just criminals. They have to be shut down, and there should be an economics board. Set up an economics board, a new economics board. This is my timer there. He's saying 5 minutes. Okay, a new economics board to support and empower and encourage business people and corporate people in Australia. You empower and encourage business people because they employ people. You must encourage small business people in particular, and good corporations and good people who are employing people and making a bit of profit, but providing an excellent service and excellent goods and services which can be cost effective as well. So economics board to empower business people and corporations and not destroy these businesses, not go in and shut them down and say, oh, you're doing this and you're doing that, or but it's just an administrative reason. But then all of a sudden they're going to take ASIC, will take the bank accounts and the assets. And I've seen a big long list of Australian businesses and companies that they destroyed. One of, for example, was a Great Southern Growers in Western Australia, was an agricultural group, $1.6 billion. They destroyed that company, 55,000 investors. They lost 80% of their money. What ASIC's been doing, stealing 80% of the wealth of the investors and the business people, and they get 20% back. It's totally criminal. So that has to be abolished. We have an economics board, and we empower and encourage farmers and business people, you know, corporate people, business people, truck drivers. There's lots of business people in the community. Do you know truck drivers? The average age of a truck driver is like 60. That's a big worry. But truck drivers are so important, and farmers are so important, and all these primary producers are so important. They're so important. We have to support all of these business people and all the truck drivers. You know, if truck drivers aren't functioning and have good conditions and getting around the country, everything stops. You don't get your deliveries, you don't get your food, the supermarkets don't get full of food, the food can't be delivered, the products can't be delivered, the goods can't be delivered, your post can't be delivered. Truck drivers need to be looked after because they transport everything, and trains. You know, in the past, after the Second World War, they used to train a lot of things around grain and bauxite and all sorts of agriculture and mineral products. And a big train system. Australia has a big train system. They don't use it properly. There should be a big national passenger network as well. There should be cheap as chips because they put those train tracks down with those big sledgehammers and you know, those wood pillars and posts. And they did that by back, and the men did that by the hard work of the men, by the bare physical strength. Now they've got all this machinery over there, and it costs them $1 billion to fix up a train line. It's absolutely disgusting. But all these train lines across Australia, all these incredible men and women who put these train lines in, and all these roads in, and they did it with their bare hands pretty much, with tools and mineral equipment. You've got all this big equipment now, and they can't even build stuff here. They can't put train lines in, run train tracks, and fix the roads and all footpaths, car paths. So many towns, about $2,000 a year homeowner rates, and they can't even put a footpath in your town. You know, it's just terrible. There's something wrong with the way people manage money in these government services. And the people that call themselves the government, they're only 1% of the population, so what the hell are they doing? Do you know what I mean? They just have no morals and values. To be an excellent leader, you have to have excellent morals, okay? If you've got excellent morals, you can be an excellent leader. But if you've got bad morals, you're going to be a bad leader. You'll create bad laws, you'll be corrupt with money, you'll use public services and public government workers and laws badly, and that's bad. We don't want people like that in power. There's a verse in the book of Proverbs, and it says, when the righteous are in power, it says, when the wicked are in power, the people groan. When the bad people are in power, the people groan. But when the good people are in power, the righteous people are in power, the people rejoice. So there's a big difference between the type of leadership you promote and implement and use, the type of decisions that you make, and the moral decisions. As I said, if you've got excellent morals, you can be an excellent leader. But you should never, ever, ever go into leadership if you've got bad morals, ever. Never even go into leadership at all. Okay, that's it. That's what I wanted to say about the economy. And my next speech is going to be given, and my book. If you want to get my book, Political Persecution of Women and Children, and some good men as well. Lots of good men have read my book. Just email me or phone me. Email me or phone me and I can post the book to you, or you can come and pick it up from me if I'm in the town. Next stop, I'm speaking in Canberra. So I'm going to speak in Canberra probably in about 5 days' time. Probably about 5 days' time, and I'll broadcast that live through Facebook as well. Okay, so everything's going to be broadcast through Facebook. And for this campaign to vote for your Governor-General, I've got a list of candidates from the public and my book, Political Persecution of Women and Children. So about 5 days I'll give a speech in Canberra, so look out for that one. God bless you, love you, take care, look after yourselves, look after your family, look after your community, love you, God bless you.